Yo, it's Money. Back again, revealing knowledge about maneuvering these 9 to 5 jobs and just life lessons in general. And today's topic, I just want to talk about toxic people or toxic coworkers at your job. You know, what does that look like? What does that look like for you? What does that look like for me? Well, do I have toxic coworkers at my job currently? No, I don't. The job I work currently, if you're toxic, or you have any sort of toxic personality or chaos energy, or just a toxic personality, or you act toxic, you know, you don't last that long at this job. Because at this job, there's really no room to be toxic at all. It's mainly just about the work. If you're toxic, that's just at this job that I'm working, it's honestly just gonna get in the way. It's just gonna get in the way of things. It's gonna get in the way of your job. But toxic people at your job, what does that look like? I would recommend, distancing yourself from those types of people. You definitely don't want to I don't want to say influence. You don't want to give these toxic people energy at your job, or you don't want to give them any opportunities, to rub their toxicity off on you. And people being toxic at job sites, or just coworkers being toxic, that doesn't help anything. It doesn't help the company. It doesn't help, the team. It doesn't help anything. So, like, it can influence you to leave your job because of toxic coworkers. It's just not it's not a healthy environment for you, and they're most likely making it harder for you to do your job. That's what these toxic coworkers do, or just toxic people at the job in general do. They make everything harder for everybody around them. Especially the team. Yeah. Just the team cannot function properly if there's toxic people on the team. It's just not. The shit isn't going to get done. The job isn't going to get done efficiently as it possibly could because of these toxic people. And they take advantage of that. That is the point of their they take advantage of their toxicity on the job, and it's used as a tool, for these people. It makes their job, well, not really, it doesn't make their job easier. Honestly, I don't know what it does for these people, because it's not helping anything. You're making everything worse, the job harder, especially on themselves. It just makes everything worse. So it can be confusing what these people get out of, being toxic on the job. And I think they're just consumed, like I said in my previous videos I've done. They aren't finding peace in anything, and they're definitely not finding peace at the job. These people are consumed by chaos, and it can bring them peace knowing that it's not even peace. It makes them feel good to trip you up at the job, make your day harder, make it tougher for you. And we will never understand these things at all. So don't even try to understand it. I mean, I never understand it if I did it for myself. If I make somebody, I'm not even like that. If I make somebody feel bad at my job or something like that, I don't necessarily feel good. Now, if I point something out that needs to be done at the job, that's not toxicity. Like toxic, we're talking about toxic here. We're talking about more than an attitude. What does that look like for you? Toxic people at your job, what does that look like for you? For an example, somebody toxic at your job, I mean, they're not going to press you about bullshit, but they're going to press you in a way where it's going to upset you, and they can do something, they can demand something out of you where it logically doesn't make any sense. And that's part of the toxicity, is they're demanding things out of you at the job that might not logically make any sense. You're just like, this is, it's just, I can't even remember exactly what happened at one of my old jobs. I had a toxic coworker, and she, excuse me, I don't even exactly remember what the hell happened, but I know she was really toxic, and I had a morning shift, and she definitely disrespected me. She definitely did that. She disrespected me as a team member, as somebody that's sharing the work assignment and workload, and you know what I did? To protect my peace, because, first of all, your lack of planning isn't my emergency. And secondly, I don't have to put up with toxic people at my job anywhere. I don't have to deal with you, and especially as a team member, I'm here to help. I'm here to get the job done. So if you're making my job harder and you're my coworker, I'm going to go like this, and I'm going to say, have a nice day. I'll see you tomorrow. And that will reach the higher ups. Oh, what happened? What happened? And your higher ups know this person is toxic. So usually if you get up and leave that day and abandon work assignments and your job for that day, it's not necessarily frowned upon. Especially if your higher ups are aware of this person being toxic on the job, and everybody's scratching their heads like, why is they still working here? It's that's the point, is that they're using their toxicity as a tool to not only stay there, but they're using it in a way just to plant themselves at these companies. But yeah, that's what it looked like at one of my old jobs. And, definitely called it a day, definitely went home, and definitely protected my peace. Because I'm not going to snap on somebody at particular job sites, especially. This was back at one of my prestigious jobs that I was talking about in the past. And yeah, I don't have to put up or deal with toxic people at my job. No, once I feel like you're trying to agitate me in a way where you're looking for some sort of reaction from me, I'm gonna call it a day and go home. Because that's not okay. Being so toxic to your team members, that nobody can do their job properly or efficiently That's not okay. You know, toxic people at the job, what does that look like for you? Let's think about this. Let's think about this logically now, right? We don't have to put up with these people. No, no. It only hurts the company. And I wish these companies would realize that and smarten up. You know, I mean, maybe that company did smarten up because I went back there and she wasn't there. So, you know, but sometimes it could take a little too long. You're like, yo, you got this toxic motherfucker working here way too long and you're not packing them up. Like, what's going on? It's affecting everything. Literally, it's affecting the job. It's affecting the team members. Most of the team members, most of the team members are assholes, but we're not toxic. I'm an asshole. I could be an asshole, but it's not being an asshole directly towards you. It's just, I'm just an asshole in general about things, about the job and stuff. Like, it's not really an attack towards people, if that makes any sort of sense. Like, you could just be an asshole in general. I get along with plenty of assholes, but we recognize these things. We can be smart asses and we can be assholes. I don't take those things personal. Yeah, toxic people at your job. What does that look like for you? Like I said, I don't have any toxic coworkers at this job, not even in the last couple years. And if you are toxic, you're not going to last too long here. This is a real independent job. There is teamwork, but for the most part, it's independent. And if you're toxic, you're just being toxic to yourself and your job and your own environment. So you're really not around other people like that. I can kind of tell during stand-up meetings and stuff, oh, that person's toxic. Dude, don't even say nothing to that person. If I do, I'm messing with them, or something. Like, I'm just poking fun, or something, cracking a joke or something. Not specifically on that person, but just about the job in general. But yeah, so one person had left a comment like, bro, I tried sharing my piece with people at the job. And everybody's toxic, everybody's negative. I mean, we got to think about this. Like, were they just being overly negative, or were they toxic? So because we can confuse these things with overly negative people at our jobs. That just have negative outlooks on life. I try not to be that way. I try to have positive outlooks on life in general, or even at the job, or even in certain situations. But I do point out bullshit in my life. Pointing out bullshit in your life, I don't think that's being negative or toxic at all. You definitely want to recognize the bullshit and be hyper aware of these things. Excuse me. You definitely want to point out, you be aware of the bullshit in your life, and that's not being negative. Being a negative nanny or whatever is like, just everything's bad in your life, the job sucks, everything, you're not finding any sort of enjoyment, but for some people, pointing out everything that's bad, it could be an enjoyment for them. It does make them feel better, maybe, possibly. I'm not sure. I don't see, for my life, if I, in part of my life, thinking negative thoughts and stuff like that, that's not healthy. That's going to lead you towards a crash out, and you're going to be a crash dummy at that point. You don't want to embody these negative thoughts, because you're going to crash out on it. That's a promise. If you think negative shit all the time, you're like one split second away from crashing out, or popping on somebody, or something like that. So we got to be aware of these things. Yeah, back to that comment. He's like, dude left a comment on one of my shorts, and he's like, yeah, I tried sharing my piece with people at the job. Everybody's just super negative. If anything, they hated me because I was so positive. And my message for that person is, you're already one step ahead. You're already a couple steps ahead of these people because you're aware of it. You're like, these people are super negative at the job. I'm so positive. They hate me for it. And people will hate you for shining at the job. Being super positive. Looking your healthiest, looking your best. I used to work at FedEx Express as a driver, and everybody from the front to the back of the building, there was only maybe 3 people there that were not negative or didn't have any sort of negative outlook on life, and they were package handlers. They weren't even delivering. They worked at the warehouse. And I would get back to the warehouse and help do certain things inside the warehouse. And I noticed I had good vibes coming off of them. And I like that, and I recognize that. But I recognize and I'm aware that every driver that worked for FedEx Express was dirty, dusty ass motherfuckers that had no good outlook. I'm not saying that, they didn't own, they weren't working on home ownership or something like that, or they weren't handling responsibilities. That's mandatory. But these people are dusty. Their uniforms are dirty. They stink. You're musty. You're dirty and you're musty. And every time I would run into other coworkers at FedEx Express, it just seemed like they always had this negative connotation or whatever the fuck. They was just always so negative. I just didn't understand it. Me, myself at that job, my uniform is damn near ironed. It's perfect. It's spotless. You thought I was part of the fucking military, how my shit was so clean all the time. Down to my van at FedEx Express was just clean. It was spotless. And then I noticed when other coworkers use my van, this shit's dusty. They don't give a fuck about anything. They don't give a fuck about nothing. They don't have any respect. They're making the van stink. They're not only dusty themselves, they're making my fucking van dusty and shit. I'm just like, bro, clean windows dirty and shit. I'm like, bruh, I'm telling you, I had the sauce at this job. And they personally had to pack me up there. They had to pack me up there because I was just shining. I was shining at this fucking job. I got a picture of me in my uniform. I was shining. Like, it just so positive. I'm making this money. I'm handling responsibilities. I don't have any reason to show up to this job pissed off. No. I show up to my job. I look good. I smell good. Sheesh, my van is good. It smells good. If anything, I was the only person in that whole company at that building that looked the best, dressed the best, and smelled the best. And I'm not trying to be I forget the name of that term. I'm not trying to come at it like, I'm better than other people. No, I'm not trying to come at it like that. I'm just saying I was aware of it. And I'm not trying to be conceited. I'm not conceited like that. I try to be humble about the stuff. But yeah, just, at one of my past jobs, FedEx Express, bro, these people were toxic at the job. I'm telling you, they're dirty, dusty, and musty. Those are signs of people that are toxic. If you're always dirty, dusty, and musty, you're probably toxic. If it smelled toxic, it looked toxic, it's probably toxic. If you're dirty, dusty, and musty at your job, you should probably self-reflect. Why am I dirty? Why am I dusty and musty at my job? If it's not a dirty job, we're talking about, like, especially corporate jobs and stuff like that. I know FedEx is a blue collar, but it's not really. Why would FedEx be? If FedEx isn't a dirty job, why are you dirty, dusty, and musty at your fucking job? You're toxic. I'm sorry. You're toxic. You're showing up. You're showing up to deliver mail. You're showing up to a job to deliver mail, and you're showing up dirty, dusty, and musty. If it looked toxic and it smelled toxic, you're probably toxic. I'm sorry. Let's call it a spade, or whatever. If it's a duck, if it quacked like a duck, walk like a duck, it looked like a duck, it's probably a duck. Yeah, toxic people at your job. What does that look like for you? Like I said, you want to distance yourself from these people and perhaps find a new job. I'm serious. Perhaps, more than likely you're going to find a new job because you're not going to be able to handle the toxicity, and if you do, that's one up to you. You got my respect. Seriously. But, you definitely want to distance yourself from these people and find a job where it's less toxic. Yeah, because the job is definitely not going to get done as efficiently, as safely and as timely as it needs to get done. Toxicity at the job is only going to impede everything, from teamwork, just the company in general. It's just going to impede everything, and that's kind of just what I wanted to share today, get off my chest. It's money, revealing knowledge about how to maneuver these 9-to-5 jobs and just life lessons in general, and I hope you learned something. Peace.